All right, we are live on YouTube.
Daniel, did you want me to monitor the YouTube channel for you, or do you have that?
Oh, if you wouldn't mind, that'd be great. If anybody types a question in there, you can pop that into the chat for me.
Will do.
I'm also just going to note the YouTube link in there, which is partially for my reference. Those of you who are joining us now on YouTube, we will get started in about 3 minutes. Just so you know, I will let people in from the waiting room about just a little bit after the hour. Gives it a little bit more time for people to show up. We do have quite a crowd already. And for those of you who are joining us on YouTube, we'll get started in about 1 minute. While we're waiting, if this has been a webinar series that you've enjoyed, I would invite you to please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start admitting the waiting room. We'll get started in just a minute as everyone is joining now. Hi, my name is Nathaniel Jones, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, How to Write a Great Building Simulation Research Paper by Shadi Attia. This is a webinar series devoted to helping you prepare for the Building Simulation or the Building Performance Analysis Conference 2022. And we hope that this will be a useful webinar to prepare you in writing a paper for that conference or for any building simulation research conferences that you're planning to attend. And now I'd like to turn it over to Shadi Attia. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Hi, everyone. My name is Shadi Attia. I am a professor at Liège University at the School of Engineering at University of Liège in Belgium. And my specialization is design decision support for high performance buildings and carbon neutral buildings. So I would like to thank IBIPSA USA for inviting me for this talk, and I would like to thank you for your interest to join this presentation. And today's presentation is about how to write a great building simulation research paper, especially that the IBIPSA conference will take place in September 2022, and it is time to start writing the papers and submit them. So allow me to take you through today's presentation and to give you an idea, the learning objectives for this presentation will be about the rules and the best practices to write your conference paper, and to formalize your research study design in general and structure your paper. This is from the communication point of view, but you should not forget that a paper is partially a communication part, and there is another part that has to do with science. And in this sense, also I will dwell around understanding the basic component of any good building performance simulation paper. So science and communication, that will be the message or the content of today's presentation. Well, I always like to start with the bottom line up front. So in a nutshell, this presentation is about the science component and the communication component in a conference paper. And I'm going to talk about the importance of reading the conference author guide before starting writing, how you connect and associate your work with the community, the building simulation community, and mainly IBIPSA USA, and the values that your work should be, let's say, in line with, especially the deeper problem understanding and the meaningfulness of your work in relation to the IBIPSA USA and general the IBIPSA work. The story, how we are going to have a persuasive evidence-based story, and how you will organize your manuscript or your conference paper, and finally, how to make sure that you will convey a clear message and that you will communicate in a correct way and logical way. So this is in a nutshell the presentation's content. If you want to go into details, I'm going now to take you through these 7 items. What is a purpose of a conference paper? What is a guide of authors? Why should I read it? And what is it there? How should I structure a conference paper? How should I develop my storytelling? What is the correct building simulation content or basics that I need to address to make sure that from a thematic point of view, my paper has a value and is respecting the state of art and best practices in this domain. And finally, the clarity before moving to some takeaway message. So let's start with the first message I want to share with you regarding the purpose. What is the purpose of a conference paper? Well, the purpose of a conference paper, first of all, is to be part of a community. This community will carry certain values, will be interested to advance the science and knowledge in a specific field, and it will bring meaning and address research problem related to this community. So the first thing you try or we do when we write a conference paper to make sure that we are close to this community, we are familiar with their values, with the problems they are tackling, so that we can become part of this community. Another purpose of writing a conference paper is to connect and to collaborate. This is a very good opportunity to meet people, to exchange ideas, to attend sessions for critique, constructive critique, and also for co-authorship, finding interested peers that might be working on the same topic. And from there, you can expand your scope of work and create a larger network of collaborators. And for sure, it is also here, the purpose of writing a conference paper is to promote your work, because it is an opportunity to present what you are doing, your lab, your work, and to share with others your work. So it's important to take this into account before writing your paper, so that you make sure that your selection for your topic will match one of these purposes for writing a paper. Now, what are the approaches that people follow to write a paper? there is different approaches. I'm not here coming to tell you what is right or wrong, but I'm just making you more conscious and aware so that you make more conscious choices. Some people start writing their paper from scratch, meaning that they have a fully new content, a scientific content. They have a result of an experiment, a result of a simulation or a modeling work. They did long observations or short observations, or even they have a literature review or a qualitative method or study that they applied, some interviews in the field related to a certain problem. And here they are presenting it for the first time. This is some of the approaches that people follow to present a content that is very new through their conference paper. There is another approach that people do, is that they present previous work, meaning that they have already a report that can be that was published or was not published, or they have a journal paper that was published or not published, and then they take a part of this work, they take an extract and they delve on it, they develop it, or they go more further into detail based on what was done before. And this is also commonly done. I'm not here to say this is right, this is wrong. I'm just telling you those are two approaches based on observations, what we see. And it's up to you to be aware, what are you going to do exactly? Why are you participating in the conference? And which type or which approach of writing and selecting your paper topic makes sense more to your own objectives. Now, talking about publishing approaches, I want to make you familiar with two important concepts. Normally, when you are presenting a paper in a conference, you will be most of the time asked either to have a long time presentation, meaning that you will present your paper, let's say 10 minutes, 8 minutes, 12 minutes, even 15 minutes, and then you will have a follow-up through a Q&A. This is an approach. And there is another approach, is to present your paper through a poster, which means that most probably you will write a manuscript like everybody else, but you will present it during the conference in the form of a poster, A0, for example, or a A1 that will be printed, and then will be a poster session where you briefly in 2, 1, 3 minutes maybe present this poster content, or even sometimes you will not present it, you will just stand in front of the poster and interact depending on who is coming to check or learn about your work, or even sometimes you can just leave your business card and people will contact you later. So it's important to take this into account, because you will be asked while you are submitting your work, are you looking to present your work in a presentation format or a poster? But at the end of the day, this has nothing to do with your manuscript. In both cases, you have to submit a manuscript respecting the author guidelines. So just to give you an idea about the publishing approaches. Now let's move to the part which is very important, the community. I mean, you should not forget that scientists are human beings rooted in cultural context and not autonomously directed toward external truths. There is a certain subjectivity in communities. And what we try to do in scientific communities, conference communities, is to try to the maximum avoid bias and to try to be objective as possible, so that the community adheres to integrity and good values that makes it a thriving community, and a community that can have an added value to the society. So it's important to keep into account that when you are publishing with the IBIPSA, you are welcomed to join this community, but also you are encouraged to get familiar with this community, get engaged, and if possible, contribute to this community. So it's important to look at this topic or this, let's say, aspect while you are writing a paper. Now, when we write a conference paper, we should ask ourselves, who is the conference community that is strongly related with and induced by the research topic? Because once you answer this question, you will be able to better select the topic, and you will be able to make sure that what you're writing corresponds to this community. So you have to answer this question first of all, and then you have to answer this following question related to the research question. So you say, are my research questions interesting for the people supposed reading the paper, this is very important, which means that from one side, you need to have very clear and well articulated research questions. And from another side, it will be a very good idea to make sure that these research questions correspond and matches in a way or another the interests of this community. And finally, looking at the conferences, it is recommended to adapt your manuscript to the conference key message, writing and work to the conference community. As you know, conferences change, they are regular, they happen every 2 years or 4 years, depending on the conference. Try always to check what is the main theme of the conference. And if you can write a paper relevant to the themes of the conference, then this is the beginning for a successful paper. So this is the beginning to look at. I always advise paper writers when they start, whether they are graduates or early career researchers or even experienced researchers, to start with the quad chart. It's a very common way to bring together different elements of your paper early on during the conceptualization or the brainstorming phase, where in this quad chart you have to define a very clear aim, define also some operational objectives, define who is the audience and the stakeholders who should benefit from this work, whether they are on the policy side, they are on the research side, they are NGOs, they are industry people, they are practice and professionals. So it's important to look at that. And also it is important to take it into a consideration while you are looking at the innovation aspect of your work and the impact of your work. And I advise, when you are brainstorming an idea at the beginning and you are not very sure, you can do this quad chart and discuss it with peers to make sure that your idea can have a relevance and can make a difference and have an added value. So this is to start with. Now, moving to the guide of authors. I finished now talking about the purpose of a conference paper. Let me take you now to the guide for authors. I advise you, first thing to do when you're writing a paper in a conference is to read the guide for authors. You need to be familiarize yourself with the conference guide for authors and submission deadlines. I can tell you, even though I have experience with publication, last year, for example, I didn't read the guide of author for one of the conferences I was going to participate, and I used the wrong template and my paper was rejected. It has to do that I was not so focused. So download the conference template as soon as you can. Respect the maximum word limit, because this is a very crucial parameter. Sometimes you have page limit, 6 pages, 4 pages, 8 pages. Sometimes it is word limits. So this is very important to make clear from the beginning. Check any requirements for tables, for figures. Some conferences will put a limit for visualization or require certain resolution and so on. Check the referencing style. Is it Harvard referencing style, APA, or whatever, so that you comply with the author guide and that you do not overwrite something or underwrite it while not complying with these requirements, and make sure that you have always acknowledgements to acknowledge whoever stakeholder or partners that helped in and contributed to this work. So this can be a beginning. And if the paper went through a first round of review, you will need also to address the reviewers' comments. So you will receive a feedback after submitting the paper, requiring you to apply certain modifications, improvements, corrections if the paper is accepted, for sure. And normally the paper can be accepted either with major or minor modifications, or it can be rejected. So in case it's accepted, you have to address those reviewers' comments. And when we talk about what writing strategy should I adopt in relation to my paper development, once I have a template and once I'm starting to write the paper, I just have some general writing advices. The abstract of the introduction are the last things to write in your manuscript. It is better to make sure that your introduction is exciting and interesting. Start with your conclusion, then write the introduction so that you know exactly what is the key message you have, and then you write your introduction based on that. The introduction could be the most important content to encourage reviewers to read further and potentially accept the paper. So you will need to invest a lot in writing your introduction. It needs to be persuasive. It's not only about science, but it's also about communication. Highlight the added value and the significance of your research in the discussion or the conclusion, and discuss the study findings and strengths, limitation, implications, and future work in your discussion section. So this is overall a writing strategy. Before even writing, keep it into mind when you start developing your work. Now let's move to the third part. After exploring the purpose of a conference paper and what is this author guide, that is something I need to check as early as possible, let's go through the paper structure. Well, the paper structure is something important, and most of the time we adopt, and I strongly advise you to follow this IMRED writing structure, which is a structure that is very common in the scientific community, where we have an introduction, a description of the methodology, results, discussion, and finally conclusions. If you want to add an additional section on the state of the art or literature review, you can add it after the introduction. But keep in mind that the scientific communities, they have a tradition to package and shape information in a very specific way. And when we talk about scientific working, a scientific writing for a conference paper or even a journal paper, unfortunately, the structure is always classical. So you need to respect this conservative approach. I know many people, when they write, they want to be very creative and they want to have their own different flow of idea and structure, but I don't advise it because it will be more difficult to understand the paper and to make, you will make the job of reviewers harder, because at the end, scientific writing has a specific structure. So just embrace this advice, I hope, and follow this IMRED structure for your work. Because audience should feel what is going on. They should be knowing where they are heading while they are reading your paper. If they are in paper page 4 or 5, they know they are towards the end, so they must be around in the results section or the discussion section. And the same if you are in the beginning, then I'm in the introduction or I'm heading to the methodology. So always make the reader feel easily how he or she is located in the text. Why are we here? Where are we coming from? And where are we going to? By following this IMRED structure of introduction, literature review, method, results, discussion, and conclusion, you make it always easy for others to go through your work and assess it, and then you will respect a sequential logic that makes the paper easier to read. And as you can see in this graph on the right side, through the introduction, method, result, discussion, you will answer the following questions: the why, the how, the what, and the so what in the discussion. So this is always something that I advise to do. Now let's move to the fourth item when we talk about paper writing, a conference paper writing. It is the storytelling. So why storytelling? It's important because it is the way of argumentation and justification of arguments that will make people convinced that this work is of an added value. Today, we have an abundance of information. Many authors are competing to publish, and it happens that you can get rejected because the work is not relevant. So not the only way, but one of the ways to make your paper interesting, read and cited by others, is to invest in your storytelling. And storytelling here is important because it's a matter of argumentation. Don't forget that the science of a paper is not only the technical part, but there is also a communication part. And if we look at any paper, as you can see in the graph, we can discover that the introduction and the discussion most of the time is very subjective, because it is depending on your style, your writing, your persuasive ability to convince the reader and cross your message, while the very hard science or the evidence-based side which is technical is related to the methods and to the findings or the results chapter. So it's important to invest in both sides, communication and science, so that you have a coherent paper that is easy to read with a clear message and for sure pleasant to read and accessible. So it is important to invest in your storytelling. Now, how can I make my storytelling more accessible? Let's start first with the introduction. I advise you in your introduction to include the following items. First of all, you need to have a short introduction or a background information that is contextualizing the problem, presenting the most relevant work, defining the problem clearly, and the problem needs to be scientific, meaning depending on your paper in a conference, some conference papers are professional papers, meaning that the problem can be related to a professional word, and some papers are scientific, depending on the conference. Make sure that your problem, if you're writing a scientific paper, that it is a real scientific problem, and if you're writing a practice-based paper or case study-based paper, then it is relevant from a professional point of view, and that there is a problem and you are developing and elaborating your work for this professional community. What is also important is to address the knowledge gap and to identify how was it this knowledge gap not addressed before, so that when you articulate and define your aims and objectives, they fall well after defining the gap, and that you claim in your work that you will try, or at least you will do your best to bridge this gap through this new paper. Also, what is important to include in the methodology, to have a short description of the methods and results. Some of you will tell me, yes, but I'm going to explain this anyway later on. Why should I put it here again in the introduction? Here it is short and presented to give an overall idea on what is coming. So actually the method and results, we describe them very shortly in the abstract, and then we describe them a bit longer in the introduction before having them fully elaborated and explained in the relevant sections, whether it is the method section or the results section. So as you can see, there is repetition sometimes in writing a paper. Just if you read a good paper, you will find this happening all the time. And for sure, before moving to the audience, don't forget to mention the added value or the significance. So what is new here? What is original here? Why this paper is important or different? What is innovative? What is the impact? And for sure, why is to whom is this paper written? Defining the stakeholders or the audience or the readers makes sense, because then you can show that the paper is really catering to a specific stakeholder, and that it's really addressing a real and specific problem, rather than just defining a general broad audience, which is not so good when you write a paper. So this is regarding the introduction. While you are building your storytelling in your introduction, this could be a kind of template that you can use in the background and make sure that you are addressing these items one by one, so that when you are finishing your introduction, it answers most of these components and elements. Once you are done with the introduction, you can move with the literature review. It's very important here to have a background that is more extended. You can include the concepts, the definitions, the theories that are related to your problem, and you can extend here the overview on the most relevant work. And it's not here about how many papers you will cite, it's just about the most relevant work. Maybe it can be 5, 6, 7 top work that was done before that is relevant and relates to your work. And you can present it in a table or in a comparative way with a visualization. This could be possible, but you must follow that with an analysis of the gap and a synthesis, where you are grouping the publications based on their methodology and findings, or chronology, for example, or other type of structural categorization, so that you come to the beef, the most important part, what is original about your work, so that you relate your work to what was done before. This is called positioning. And when you position your work to the gap and what was done before, you should be able to say that here I am coming with something new, with an innovation, with a simple attempt to bring something new, incremental new knowledge to the context of the literature that exists. So this would be my advice to substructure your literature review section. Sometimes some people don't write this section at all and they directly integrate it into introduction. It is okay. There is no clear rule here. Some people do it integrated with introduction, some separated. It depends, but definitely if you have this part is important and is extended, it is recommended to separate it from the introduction so that the message is not so overcrowded and that you can separate these different elements from your introduction. Now moving to still the communication side that can be subjective and related to your writing style, talking about this discussion. Take care that I skipped explicitly after the literature review, the methods and the results, because the methods and the results for me are pure science and they are very technical. I'm still here talking about storytelling. So here there is a subjectivity, there is argumentation, there is justification, and therefore I'm saying that introduction in general, and then the literature review and the discussion, they're always considered as the subjective part of the writing, and they are related to the communication. Here you need to look at critical assessment to provide a critical review of the work regarding the methodology and the results. Check the internal validity of your work, criticize it externally. Can I generalize my work? Is my work only case specific? Was I testing the hypotheses? Is my scope of work covering enough the work or the field? Can the results be similar to other work in the similar context? What were the study limitations? Were the most methods used appropriate, accurate, state-of-the-art, advanced? Does the result make sense in general if I compare it with others, and so on? And for sure, in the discussion, you need to talk about implications and future work. What does my work have as an implication on practice, on research, policy, society, NGO, professional world, academics, whatever? And what should be done by future scientists if somebody wish to follow up what I did in my paper? So you can see this is also can be a kind of suggestion for a substructure for your discussion. And once you try to address each of these items in regard to your topic, you can have a good content and you can fill up this part of your paper. Now I would like to leave the storytelling part, which is very strongly related to communication, how you are conveying your message, to the message itself, the science side, the building simulation side. And I would like to start here by citing the work of Paradis and Zimmerman when they talk about the methodology. The first part that is very technical and very scientific when you write your conference paper is the methodology. And here they say that the methods section of an article describes the tools and processes that enabled you to meet the stated objectives of the introduction. And here we are talking about a section that will be read for at least two major reasons. First, because readers will judge how skillfully you have designed the empirical process of the problem solving. And second, readers may test your methodology against your result in their own laboratories or in their own simulation models. And in methodology section, clarity and accuracy are priority, and there is less need to have a persuasive language. It's technical. How did you do it? It's about the how. So this is very technical language, very scientific, and there is less kind of storytelling in it, even though it needs to have a minimum logical sequence, but it is less subjective compared to the introduction or to the discussion. Now, one of the things that will be very important to take into account when you are talking about your research methodologies is to define clearly, are you in the field of quantitative research or qualitative research? Are you doing mixed research combining both? And in science, there is no many options. Either you are doing qualitative research, which is including literature review, systematic reviews, interviews, focus group discussions, case studies, usability testing, and so on. Or you are doing quantitative research, and under quantitative research, it is either experimental work or observational work through surveys and measurements, for example, or you have a modeling work. And why I'm sharing this slide with you, because when you write your methodology section, you need to make it very clear which methodology did you use, so that later on the reader check your work, they can have an easy understanding on what was done. Was it done in compliance with the state of the art or best practices? And even you should look that the reproducibility or reproducing the work can be possible through your communication. So here, when I talk about your methodology, you need to describe, did you do a laboratory work? Did you do simulations? Did you have a living lab, a sandbox, a real world test bed? Did you have a demonstrator? Especially if you are doing anything that has to do with modeling or experimental work or observational work. If you have a study that is more on the qualitative side, a literature review or focus groups or interviews, then this is not what I mean. But these kind of descriptions of your research settings are very important if you are following a quantitative approach. And when we talk about building performance simulations, since we are in a virtual reality or kind of a virtual modeling approach, it's very important to not forget evidence and make sure that our simulation is validated. And any paper that relies on simulation needs closer links to laboratory or field measurement. In this sense, for example, if you are investigating external gains, internal gains, heat losses, and so on, you need to check for every physical phenomena, what could be my verification or experimental way to bring more evidence and to calibrate or to make sure that my simulation makes sense and is close to reality. And here, if you are doing something with weather, you can check normalization, you can check different weather files, envelope, you can measure the U value, you can maybe get information about air tightness, try to triangulate the information from different references. If you have thermal imaging, indoor environmental quality, if you are doing simulations, if possible, you have information about air temperature or about humidity, or if you can calculate or measure operative temperature, CO2 concentration. If you have something related to occupants, it will be very good if you can validate through presence detection or calculating the occupants density, or doing observations using logbooks, for example, using smartphones. So always communicate or convey, if you are doing a simulation, how did you validate this information and how far is it from the truth? And in case you use measured data to calibrate, if you have good measured data, you can use it to calibrate your model so that the reliability of model is closely connected to the capacity to reproduce a certain real life phenomena. As I told you, these are all options to look at. And when I am reviewing the methodology section, I don't want only to see the side that is relevant to the simulation, but I want to see also how far did you link your work to laboratory. And assuming that you do not have any experimental or any laboratory work, then, well, the next step can be that you start to test your validity of your model by doing other things. If your simulation work does not involve close links to laboratory or field measurement, then it is a common and a best practice is to do an uncertainty analysis or to do a sensitivity analysis. For example, the uncertainty analysis objective is to quantify the output variability so that you can say how far you think, even though maybe I don't have measurements to validate my content or verify my results, no problem, but I did as uncertainty analysis to see how far this variance or variability is there, and I try to quantify it. I can try to do a sensitivity analysis where the objective is to determine the most influential input parameters, because sometimes you are doing simulation just to compare two alternatives. You are not looking for a very accurate prediction or a very accurate calculation. So it's very important to look at that, to link the modeling to experimental work. And if you are working using experimental methods, then you can directly right away report your experimental work. If you're doing observations, statistical tests will be very good to describe it. You can do the parametric testing or the parametric analysis for describing your samples. You can do also non-parametric analysis for describing your samples. So keep in mind that once you are using any of these quantitative approaches, every approach has some, let's say, minimum best practices to make sure that this approach is well validated. So moving further with this science part of your manuscript, we are writing now the results. What differentiate the results from the methods? Well, the method is related to how the data were accumulated, while the results is about what data were accumulated. And here you need to distinguish both. In the methods, as if you are writing, how did you, or what was your recipe to produce this work, or if you are cooking, while the result, what is the final work, and you just need to highlight the findings and describe it as much as you can. So readers expect to find the answers to your research question in your results section. So it's very important that the results section is factual, tangible, objective, quantified, based. Most of your figures, most probably, and tables will be in this place. And you have to check what is the purpose of the results section. Simply is to be objective. So make the data, just the data, easy to find. Some readers want to interpret your data themselves rather than accepting the interpretation presented in the discussion. So distinguish between interpreting your work and presenting it in a raw or in a basic format by having a results section that is pure factual evidence, and in the discussion you start to put your own opinion, your interpretation, so that you describe the data simply in the figures and tables without explaining why or what could this have as an implication. Also, what we can say when we distinguish the results from the discussion, the results are more like data presentation, experiment showed that, or simulation showed that, while discussion is more interpretation. So here we can say the experiment suggests that. We can even elaborate on this difference to make sure that we distinguish the discussion from the result. However, you still need to choose which data to present in your results section and act for interpretation in the discussion section. So this brings me to the last part of your paper that should be also on the communication side and in the same time on the scientific part. Here I'm putting it in red and in blue. It is science and communication. The conclusion, writing the conclusion should include facts, findings. It has to be factual, tangible, but in the same time, it has to have some minimum storytelling. Here we are talking about maximum 800 words, a short conclusion, a summary of the work and results that describe the strengths and weakness of the result, position the work in the larger perspective, mention the contribution, mention future work, but in a very shorter text. Conclusion should be brief summaries and briefing the discussion, and you can make things more concrete by emphasizing limitations, advantages, and applications. And every time you can check the corresponding content here. For example, the limitation, the emphasizing the assumptions, advantages, what is better than previously published work, and application, where can this result be used. So to wrap up this section about science, a conference paper should have a part that has to do with storytelling and communication, and a part that has to do with science and validation and accuracy. So try to combine those together. When you build up your logic with communication, focus in the introduction and in the discussion to have a persuasive and storytelling language. When you are writing your methodology and your results, we are talking about a very technical writing that is factual, that is empirical, and that is very systematic, with very little room of persuasion or having an eloquent language or a subjective input. Here you are just very technically listing how was it done, and what are the outcome of what you did. Now I'm going almost to the end of the presentation. This is the last item I want to talk with you about before moving to the takeaway message: clarity. Well, clarity involves, first of all, to make sure that your figures and tables are clear. As you can see, it's about clear communication. So don't come up with your unique mode of communication. It's not the time to do it. Check what are the best practices. Use effective visualization. As you can see, a graph should be having no frames. You need to have very clear white background colors. Avoid major grid lines. Make the graph self-speaking and very neat, clean, and simple. You can see also that the data representation is sometimes an issue. The proportionality of data is important. You look at the graph on the left side, for example. Here we are talking about a scale on the x-axis that started with 34%, while the proper way to represent the data is to start from 0, so that when you are reporting or visualizing this disparity between the two samples, you do not have this false effect of magnified difference. And then you can put the things in picture. So dimensions of your graphs and the scale is used is very important. And again, avoid using frames, background colors, avoid major grid lines, and non-zero baseline is not a good thing. You must start, or it's very recommended to start with 0 baseline. And to make sure that you are clear, don't forget your chart must have a title. It must have axes with titles. So you have a title for the x-axis, for the y-axis. You need to have a legend. Make sure that you have data labels. The axes are well presented and that you have a good scaling. Grid lines can be present or not. Plot area overall. If you have a chance to introduce error bars, that will be very good. And make sure that there's a text caption and that you are citing the figure in the text and you are citing the table in the text in a way that corresponds to the location of the figure and the table in your graph. So this is part of the clarity of your text, is to invest enough in visualizations, whether they're images, whether they are graphs, whether they are tables. Now, when we talk about clarity about text, here I'm looking to have a structured writings, to have clear paragraphs, to make sure that I'm answering the research questions, because the key, let's say, instrument that will guide the whole paper writing is to have research questions and to try to answer those research questions. This is the main, let's say, control element that will make sure that your paper is well written. You have clear research question, you have the answers for those research questions. Make sure that you have a good English writing quality, dense writing as much as you can, simplify and repeat. Sometimes you need to repeat, sometimes in the abstract, you repeat sometimes part of it in the introduction. You remind the reader in the discussion what was the purpose of the paper, what was the research question we wanted to talk about. And in the conclusion, again, we have some part of repetition, because we repeat with a more dense what we did or what we said in the discussion. Avoid running sentences. This is very common to have running sentences, sentences that are very long, sentences that have 2 or 3 or 4 meanings in the same sentences. In English, we write short sentences with 1 meaning or 1 idea per sentence. So make sure that you are respecting these best practices, and then invest also in critical editing. Critical editing is very important, because you need to make sure that your English is coherent and that the science is correct and that the communication is correct. For example, you should limit the paragraph to a single message, and you need to do critical editing by asking maybe a peer to read the work. This will be a very good practice. If you cannot find any access to a peer, or you are very late or in the last stages of before submission, then at least I advise you to read yourself the paper loudly. And believe me, even if you are not a native speaker, you will figure out that there is a lot of words or sentences or paragraphs are not well formulated, because when you hear them, they do not make sense or something is missing. So the cheapest and the backup plan will be reading your article, but this does not justify that you need to plan ahead, and it's always preferable to share your paper with somebody who can gives you some insight from a language point of view. Voila, I think I'm done with the presentation. Some takeaway message before we can have some discussion, or if you have comments. Well, in a nutshell, a conference paper has a communication component and a science component. Any paper that relies on simulation needs closer links to laboratory or field measurement. Try to establish this link and talk about it. If not, then conduct an uncertainty analysis or a sensitivity analysis to communicate the degree of confidence of your work, the degree of bias of your work, the range of error of your work. And we can see that in all other fields. If you do experimental work, we do also communicate the confidence interval. For example, if you do statistical work, we can communicate the mean error values and so on. So be aware that in the modeling work, if we cannot have experimental data to back up our modeling, then you can do uncertainty analysis or sensitivity analysis. And in general, look at first by review your conference author guide, check your community's values, and try to have a deeper understanding of the problem that they are concerned with, and make sure that your story is meaningful. Make sure also that your story is persuasive based on evidence, and that you have a key message you are conveying. It must be very clear in your paper what is the key message that you want to convey, because at the end of the day, people will read the paper and forget about it. If you are not conscious and writing and designing your paper from the beginning to convey the key message that is based mainly on your findings, it will be very difficult to make your paper recognizable, or people will not remember it. So the key message is very important. And how can I develop it? Once I have findings and I find something that worth to be published, I can say, okay, voila, here are my key findings, or my key messages that I want to convey, and make sure that they are present in the introduction, present in the discussion. Organization structure, we talked about it, the IMRED method, very important, and make sure that you have a minimalistic writing style, correct writing style with logical reasoning, so that you are well presenting a very good and a great paper. Well, this is the end of today's presentation. The presentation was about how to write a great building simulation research paper. If you have any comments, since this video or this presentation will be on YouTube, don't hesitate to add any additional feedback, anything that you think can be complementary or useful for others. Don't hesitate to put it in the comments. If you have an interesting website or any other recommendation related to writing conference paper, I would like to invite you to like the video, subscribe to the IBIPSA USA channel, and for sure, if you find anybody who can benefit from this work, don't hesitate to share the video. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Shadi. That was a great presentation. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions that people in the audience have. If you have a question, please find the reaction button in Zoom and raise your hand using that reaction button. Or if you don't have access to a microphone, you can type it into the chat, or type your question into the chat on our live YouTube feed. While people are coming up with their questions, I'd just like to start things out by asking one of my own. Some people will be writing papers where they may not be sure of how whether that topic is of importance to the community, or they may be trying to sell the community on the importance of some new topic. How do you recommend showing the readers that this is an important topic, and developing an interest in the topic for readers?
True, this is a very good question. Thank you, Nathaniel. Well, I always advise that people check previous proceedings. For example, I just asked you earlier if the proceeding of the previous IBIPSA USA is available, and you said that the 2020 proceedings are available on the ASHRI website, for example. And this is a good idea, is to start fetching the previous conference and checking what was written, what were the topics and the themes that were categorized. And from there, I can start reading, looking at previous work and make sure if what I'm suggesting as an idea was having a resonance. Was it already maybe presented earlier, or somebody discussed it or published some topic around it? For sure, I advise everybody to attend conferences because this is the starting point. But assuming if somebody never attended an IBIPSA conference, USA or World, you can just start by looking at previous publication, and from there you can see what are the topics. For example, today you can see that in the last 2 years the topic of COVID is becoming so important, a lot of publication about it. Voila, if you have some work related to that, then it is showing that people are interested. There is a lot of interest in urban simulations, for example. So depending on previous work, you can define if your topic is interesting or not. And for sure, I advise, the best advice is to attend a conference, and from there you will find answers.
Here's a question. How do you decide how much information to put into tables and figures versus putting that information directly into the text? Or should you try to repeat information both in tables and in the text?
Good question. First of all, it is not recommended to repeat what is in the table or in the figures in the text. In fact, the figure or the table should present new or independent, or let's say new content, meaning that you just should describe shortly the figure or the table and leave the table itself convey its content. So this is the first thing. Regarding how much information should I include in the figure or in the table, well, you still need to allow people to understand the most important information in a way that at least they can reproduce the work, or at least imitate your approach and have similar results. For sure, don't forget that maybe you can have an appendix. In some conferences, you cannot have an appendix, or if you have a limited amount of pages, then maybe you can better have a report or have your own URL that includes all this additional information, or if you can publish a data set and you just cite your data set or your report or your supplementary material and link it only in your paper. And this will liberate a lot of space, and this will allow you only to focus and present the most important tables and the most important figures. Take into account that in a conference paper we are talking here about, it's recommended to not exceed more than 5 figures. This is already too much. 5 figures are fine, 6 figures is okay. 3, 4, 5 tables, more or less. I'm just giving some rough estimations, but more than that, it will be too much abundant, and therefore you need to keep it concise.
All right. Thanks. I want to remind everyone, if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand using the Zoom interface, or if you just want to type to me in the chat, you have a question, I can call on you. We have a question from Fadi. Fadi, do you want to go ahead and ask yours?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to ask about how to calibrate an energy model if conducting a monitoring on the building is not possible, and also measure meters or measure data for the electricity bills or the consumption in general are not available.
Thank you, Fadi. Well, I think simply with calibration, we start with best practice having at least 3 years of monthly data for electricity, gas, for example, and then depending on the situation, we start to become less strict. So if you do not have access to this information, 3 years at least, 36 months of electricity and gas, or whatever the fuel you are using, then most probably you will calibrate it based on comfort conditions, meaning that we go to 1 week or 3 weeks of temperature monitoring just with simple data logger and humidity, and we just try to imitate the same indoor comfort condition and shorten the calibration time. But for sure, calibration is a wide field. I cannot cover it and I cannot answer this question in this session, but at least I'm happy that I raised this question, that you're raising this question, because it's very important. There is the ASHRAE 140 guide, there is the IPMVP standard. There's enough documents that can talk about calibration. There's even, I think, presentations. The most important that you include this part in your paper and that you address it and you show that you did your best in relation to the model that you have, and for sure try to comply as much as can with the standards and the guidelines.
There's a related question from Mikkel. In building energy simulations, is comparing the EUI, the measured energy use, as well as sensitivity analysis enough to be the validation in a paper?
Well, thank you for the question. Well, it depends. Again, every time it depends on the paper. You need to read the paper as a reviewer, but at least a paper without any calibration work will be hardly accepted. So if you are communicating the EUI, it depends on the duration. As I said, 36 months is the minimum. If you have 1 year, 12 months, and you say this is the best available data I have, and for such a building, I could not find other material. If you have done some basic time series comparisons for the indoor temperature, yeah, it depends at the end. But the most important, what I want to say is today, if we are talking about a vaccination, for example, any vaccination will tell you how much is the confidence in this vaccine, meaning that how many people tried it and how much was it effective. The same in the modeling world, regardless if you have enough evidence or if you have enough laboratory or if you have enough data to back your model, at the end, you need to be transparent and you need to communicate the uncertainty. You say, I did my best and I have a certainty or I have a confidence in my model, 50%, 30%, 20%. But what I find it sometimes not okay, that we as modeler, we think that calibration is not part of the job. No, calibration is part of a job, and whatever model we are building and whatever results we are sharing with readers, we must say how confident or how uncertain or what is the error range or what is the probability that this model is accurate. This is very important component to make sure that we are as scientists also serious in our approach. Even if the data is not available, then just convey what you did, what you have, and estimate the confidence or the uncertainty of your model.
I see a hand up from Sarah. Sarah, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, hello. Thank you for the presentation, very informative and very compact. I have a question regarding I want a clear difference between the discussion, the results, and the conclusion, because sometimes I get confused about at least two of them. I want to, or do I have to repeat? You said there is a part of research where you repeat some things. So if you can give me a difference between them.
Thank you, Sarah. Let's take it in order so that if you are going to write the paper, you can follow this order and it will clarify this ambiguity. First of all, results, start with results. Results is very factual. Actually, you have figures or you have tables or you have certain bullets or facts that you came out with through your model or your experiment or whatever research work you did, and you are just reporting it. You are reporting it in a quantifiable way. You are reporting it in a descriptive way that is very factual, supporting figures, graphs, or even if there's no figures and graphs, the text is explaining what did you get out from your results. So here you are neutral, you are concise, you are short, you are dense, you are tangible. Once I have this dry result section, sorry, it's dry because you are not here to say your opinion. It's just what you found because it's experimental. You're studying the influence of a variable, you're investigating a phenomena. So you're just reporting. It's just pure reporting without any color. Once you are done with the results, comes then the discussion. The discussion is more of a reflection, meaning that here I can come up with my subjectivity, your personal thinking. You can contextualize now these results in your understanding. So here you start to maybe remind findings, but then from now on, you start to talk about what is the recommendations in relation to your work, what should be done in the future, what are the implications, what is strong about your approach, what is weak about your approach, who should benefit from this study. Here we are coming back to position the result in a societal context with a critical regard and to with a comparative also approach regarding others' works and if this approach can be transferred to other contexts. So this is more general and this is very important because it reflects your level of consciousness and how you are aware about the industry and the field. And here you can go back touching reality, meaning practice, profession, policy, our real life. In the results, it was very experimental or it was very scientific. You have the model, while in the discussion, you are going back to the larger perspective, opinion, you give some recommendation and so on. Conclusion, which is then the third that needs to be written, is to summarize the results, the key results with the key discussion messages so that you, if somebody will read the conclusion, he or she will not miss the key findings and will not miss what is the key message you want to convey in a very dense and short way. So this is simply the answer. I don't know if this is clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And we have a question from Yimin. Regarding graphics, how do you balance complexity with information-rich content? So he doesn't want to be overwhelming.
Yeah, that's a difficult question, but I still believe that graphics or visual information is very powerful, and it's much powerful than words, meaning that complexity is not an issue. Maybe, again, what I do normally is that I try to, in a conference paper, to say, okay, I will not produce more than 5 figures, and I need to make sure that those 5 figures will cover the key findings and the key message that I have. And based on that, I start to invest in drawing the figure. That's all I can say. It's a bit general question, or sorry, it's a general answer, but again, it's case specific with experience, but don't underestimate people. Maybe you can make a simple graph that is very accessible, very clear with main concept and ideas, and then maybe you make this complex graph so that in case the reader did not understand this complex graph, you have another one that is more simple. But also figures are really hard to do. Good figures and good graphs, they require experience, infographics, and I try always to learn from newspapers because newspapers, big newspapers, I don't need to cite here, big newspapers, they recruit infographic experts, and I think this is one of the best to follow these infographic newspapers and try to imitate the way of presenting the information, how to simplify it. And this is also another domain that requires a lot of graphic design and software. So yeah, it is an open field for improvement.
All right, we can take one more question if there are any hands to go up now. I don't see any. It looks like it was a very, very popular presentation, and I'm glad that you were here to give it to us. I just want to wrap up with a few things. First of all, thanks to everyone for joining this IBIPSA USA Research Committee webinar. If you enjoyed this webinar, please consider joining the IBIPSA USA Research Committee. Email research@ibipsa.us or follow the link in the Zoom chat window for more information. For those of you watching us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for everyone, please join us again for our next webinar for authors on December 16th at noon Pacific time, when Andy Barris will present A Picture is Worth 1,000 Words, Effective Visualization for Presentations. All right, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nathaniel. Thank you, everyone, and good luck.